Hey guys, tonight we ease ourselves into the dim glow of a medieval forge, where the air feels thick enough to chew and every surface is coated in a thin, gritty permanence of soot. You stand just inside the doorway, blinking through the smoky haze as the first wave of heat hits your face, like opening an oven, except this oven is your new workplace and you probably won't survive this if you're wearing anything polyester. The air smells like charcoal dust, singed wool, and a hint of metal that somehow tastes sharp on your tongue. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here.
And hey, while you settle in, drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always comforting to know who else is drifting off with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step farther inside, adjusting to the dimness as your eyes settle on the heart of the workspace, the forge itself. It squats against the back wall like a small, angry dragon, its belly flickering with embers that pulse a warm, reddish glow. The heat radiates outward in waves, warming your face and ankles and everything in between. It's the kind of heat that feels personal, almost judgmental, the kind that makes you question your life choices. As you stand there, a bead of sweat rolls down your temple even though you haven't taken a single step toward actual labor yet. A promising beginning. The walls around you are stacked with tools, hammers of various weights, tongs shaped like strange skeletal fingers, and long iron rods waiting to be transformed into something functional. Most medieval smiths didn't have neat, Pinterest-ready workshops. Everything here feels improvised, repurposed, or slightly suspicious. Historians still argue whether small-town forges followed any standardized layout, or if blacksmiths simply shoved things wherever they fit and hoped for the best. Judging from the clutter in front of you, the latter seems entirely plausible. As you explore the cramped space, you notice how every square inch seems to hum with old heat. Even the anvil radiates a faint warmth, like it's been sitting in the sun for hours. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Medieval blacksmiths were essential community members, crafting tools, horseshoes, nails, plowshares, basically anything involving metal. You're not here to become a glamorous artisan, you're here to make the mundane ironwork that everyone relies on but no one thanks you for. It's like being the medieval equivalent of tech support. You run your hand along a wooden workbench, feeling grooves worn into it by years of hammer strikes and dragged metal. A quirky little tidbit emerges. Some medieval smiths believed a forge's personality affected their work. A forge that smoked too much, cracked too often, or seemed to sulk on cold mornings might be considered moody or unlucky. You glance at your forge again, watching it exhale a small cloud of sparks. Oh yes, this one absolutely has opinions. A soft clink draws your attention to the far corner. Your master, the blacksmith who has agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to train you, is sorting through a pile of scrap metal. He doesn't look up, but he does grunt, which in this context counts as a warm welcome. His posture suggests he's been awake for hours already, muscles moving with a kind of weary precision. His shoulders are broad, though not because he works out. They're simply shaped by decades of swinging iron like a human metronome. You shuffle closer, trying not to trip over an unfortunately placed bucket of water. He gestures vaguely toward the forge, muttering something that sounds like, "You'll be starting there." Wonderful. Nothing like being thrown directly into the dragon's mouth before breakfast. You nod, pretending confidence, even though internally you're giving yourself a silent pep talk. You edge toward the forge, a prickling heat tracing up your legs. Your master hands you a pair of long, awkwardly heavy tongs. They're colder than expected and rough against your palms. You hold them like someone trying to pick up a cat that definitely does not want to be held. Your master doesn't comment, but the tiny smirk on his face tells you he notices everything. He motions to a half-formed iron rod resting in the coals. "Pull it out," he says. The rod glows a deep orange. The
color of molten sunset, and you can feel its heat from several feet away. You swallow. This is the moment you realize that blacksmithing is basically manual labor's version of playing Operation, except the buzzer is third-degree burns and there are no spare lives. You slide the tongs around the iron rod, trying to grip it firmly. It immediately slips. You try again. Slip. Your master sighs loudly enough to rattle the rafters. On the third attempt, you finally manage to secure it, lifting the glowing metal from the fire with all the grace of someone trying to fish noodles with tweezers. The heat blasts your face as you turn, carrying the metal toward the anvil. Your eyes water. If you wore mascara, it would already be migrating south. The metal sizzles gently in the air, making a sound like angry bees trapped inside a kettle. You place it on the anvil, and the sound changes to a sharp hiss, the iron reacting to the cooler surface. A dull ache is already forming in your wrists from the weight. Your master hands you a hammer. It's heavier than you expected, dense, uncompromising, and shaped like it wants to teach you a lesson. Strike the end, he instructs. You lift the hammer, feeling your arm protest immediately. And then you realize the hilarious truth of medieval blacksmithing. This is just a warm-up. You bring the hammer down. The strike glances off-center, sending the rod skittering slightly on the anvil like a startled lizard. Your master shakes his head, steps in close, and with a single fluid motion brings his own hammer down with a clean, ringing strike that echoes through the workshop. Sparks fly like tiny fireworks, drifting briefly before dying in the air. It looks almost graceful, dangerous but graceful. You try again, and this time the hammer connects more solidly. There's a satisfying thud, and the iron begins to flatten under your effort. As you continue, settling into a clumsy rhythm, you become acutely aware of the heat again. It wraps around you, sinking into your clothes, clinging to your skin. Your breath feels warm even as you exhale. Sweat gathers at the base of your neck and between your shoulder blades, making your tunic stick uncomfortably. And this is just the beginning. Real blacksmiths worked like this for hours on end. A stray spark lands on your sleeve and you slap it away, startled. That's your first unofficial lesson of the forge. Everything here wants to sting you, burn you, or bruise you, sometimes all three at once. But as you continue hammering, the motion becomes slightly less awkward, and you start to understand why smiths could take pride in their work despite the discomfort. There's something deeply satisfying about shaping metal with nothing but fire, muscle, and stubborn determination. You stand there, panting lightly, the warm glow of the forge painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Your master nods once, approval, or at least the absence of disappointment. You'll take it. And so your life in the forge begins, one awkward hammer swing and ill-timed sweat bead at a time. You wake before the sun even thinks about climbing over the horizon, dragged out of sleep by the steady, low groan of the village stirring to life. The forge isn't far from where you sleep, if you can call that lumpy bed of straw an actual place of rest, so the familiar sense of charcoal smoke sneaks into your morning before you're fully aware of your own name. You blink up at the ceiling, listening to the faint crackle of embers that never fully went out overnight. In a medieval forge, the fire sleeps lighter than you do. You sit up slowly, every muscle complaining like you owe them money. Your back tightens, your shoulders ache, and your arms feel like they've been swapped with 2 sacks of grain while you were unconscious. The good news is that this means you had a truly authentic blacksmith's first day. The bad news is that this is going to be your every morning for the foreseeable future. Congratulations! You shuffle across the small room and splash your face with cold water that somehow feels aggressively judgmental. Your reflection in the bucket shows the faint outline of soot across your cheekbone, soot that you definitely scrubbed off last night. Medieval blacksmith dirt seems to regenerate like it's unionized.
Historians still argue whether smiths intentionally left a bit of soot as a kind of identity badge or if it was simply impossible to get clean. Based on the smudges that never come off your arms no matter how long you scrub, you're leaning toward impossible. Stepping outside, the morning air is sharp and brisk, a total betrayal after the sweltering embrace of yesterday's forge. The village is mostly quiet, save for a rooster practicing his morning scream therapy on a nearby fence post. You take a slow breath, savoring the temporary coolness before walking back toward the workshop, a short walk that still manages to feel too long. In the dim gray-blue of dawn, the forge looms like a dark mouth waiting to swallow you for breakfast. Your master is already awake, of course. Some medieval blacksmiths were known to rise even earlier than farmers, partly because the forge took forever to heat up. A mainstream historical fact drifts in. Keeping the fire alive was crucial, since starting a new one from scratch could take ages. You find him leaning over the coals, stoking them with the same gritty affection someone might use when waking a grumpy pet. His silhouette glows orange from below, and he doesn't bother turning around as he speaks. You're late. You blink at him. It's not even sunrise, you mutter. He grunts. In blacksmith language, that probably means, excuses are tools of the weak, now grab your tongs. You step closer to the forge, already feeling the first hints of warmth sneaking up your shins. The coals shift and crackle, sending a few sparks drifting lazily upward. You swear the forge looks at you, like it remembers you from yesterday and would like to try again to toast your eyebrows. Your master hands you a bellows handle. It's large, awkward, and heavier than something that produces air has any right to be. Medieval bellows were the lungs of the workshop, and your poor, sleep-deprived arms are now responsible for breathing life into the fire. You take your position and begin pumping, slowly at first. The bellows wheeze dramatically, like an old man being asked to hurry. The coals respond with a faint glow. More, your master grumbles. You pump harder. The fire brightens, the coals shift, and the orange deepens into a hot, hungry red. Sweat pricks your forehead even though the sun itself hasn't bothered waking up yet. Amazing! Your day barely started and you're already moist. One light joke per 1,000 words, check. Your arms begin to ache with a familiar dull burn, and you realize the cruel truth of blacksmithing mornings. The warm-up is also the workout. There is no gentle ramp-up in this profession. Everything is heavy, hot, or angry at you. Sometimes all three. Your master finally nods, signaling you can stop. You release the bellows and shake out your sore arms, trying to pretend your muscles aren't already plotting mutiny. Your master passes you a chunk of raw iron, setting it near the edge of the fire. It looks harmless, cold, dull, unbothered. You know what's coming. That same chunk of metal is about to become the bane of your morning. He motions for you to lean in just a little, examining the color of the coals and the metal. You do. The heat rising from the forge smacks you in the face like you've offended it personally. Your eyelashes feel slightly warmer than usual. Lovely. A quirky historical tidbit comes to mind. Some medieval blacksmiths checked forge heat using bread dough. If the dough cooked too fast or burned immediately, the fire was too hot. You imagine tossing a piece of dough into the forge right now, only for it to instantly vanish in a small puff of regret. Your master taps the anvil with the back of his hammer, an impatient signal. You'll shape this today, he says. Nails. Ah yes, medieval blacksmith nails. Tiny, unassuming, deceptively evil. Making nails wasn't difficult, but it was endless work. A simple farmhouse could need hundreds. You're basically going to spend the morning making medieval pushpins while sweating like you're starring in a fitness DVD no one asked for. You begin the familiar rhythm from yesterday. Heat, lift, hammer, repeat. Except now you're doing it with muscles that feel like they're made of overcooked noodles.
The first nail forms awkwardly, slightly bent, slightly lopsided, basically like you. Your master inspects it, eyebrows rising with disappointment so strong you can actually feel it. He tosses it back onto the scrap pile. Again, you keep going. Hammering in the morning has a special, almost meditative sensation. Except the meditation involves repetitive impacts, flying sparks, and the constant possibility of bruising your knuckles. With each strike, the air fills with that familiar clang, sharp and ringing, echoing through the village like a metallic rooster announcing that yes, you're up, and yes, this is your life now. As the morning stretches on, your tunic clings to you in new, creative ways. The forge heat intensifies, rising from warm breath to full-on sauna. The sour-sweet scent of charcoal dust settles into your skin. You attempt a second light joke to yourself. If medieval deodorant existed, this would be its moment to shine. But tragically, it did not. Your master moves around the workshop, his own motions swift and practiced. He barely seems to feel the heat or notice the sweat dripping down his temples. You wonder if blacksmiths eventually developed a kind of heat immunity, or if they were just too stubborn to acknowledge being uncomfortable. Historians still argue whether the daily exposure to extreme temperatures strengthened their bodies or simply wore them down faster. Based on your current state, slightly melted, you suspect the latter. As the sun finally rises outside, golden light creeps across the workshop floor, mingling with the fiery glow from the forge. You pause for a brief moment, watching dust particles swirl gently in the air. The contrast between cool natural light and hot forge light creates a strange dreamlike haze. For just a second, you imagine sitting in a quiet meadow instead, eating cold fruit and not sweating directly into your own shoes. Your master clears his throat. Fantasy time is over. You shape another nail, this one straighter than the last. When you hand it to him, he grunts approvingly. High praise. The morning stretches onward in its slow, tiring rhythm, each swing of the hammer blending into the next. You lose track of time. The forge crackles, the bellows groan, the anvil rings, your new soundtrack to daily life. When your master finally calls for a short break, you feel your body sag with relief. You set the hammer down carefully, flexing your sore fingers. This is your second morning as a medieval blacksmith. And if this is how it starts, well, you can only hope it eventually gets easier. Your fingers are already stiff when you return to the workbench after that painfully short break. And now your master decides it's time to introduce you to the full cast of medieval tools. Every clunky, heavy, slightly vindictive piece of iron you'll be wrestling with for the rest of your blacksmithing life. The tools look innocent enough in the dim glow of the forge, but the moment you pick one up, you realize each one has the personality of an annoyed cat and the weight of a small meteorite. Your master begins by handing you a pair of tongs so long they might as well be medieval selfie sticks. You grip the handles and instantly your wrists wobble under the weight. Tongs, you realize, are the blacksmith's version of chopsticks, but made for dragons. The hinge squeaks in a way that suggests it hasn't been oiled since the reign of someone whose name you can't remember. You adjust your grip, feeling the cold iron pinch your palm. Fantastic! Your day's workout has begun. Hold them tighter, your master says, without looking up from the anvil. You tighten your grip. The tongs respond by tightening their grip on you. You swear they have a mind of their own. A mainstream historical fact drifts up. Medieval tools weren't standardized. Blacksmiths made their own tools, which means every smith had slightly different sizes, shapes, and attitudes in their equipment. Your master's tools seem to have been forged by someone with enormous hands, a questionable sense of ergonomics, and a personal vendetta against apprentices. You move to the next tool on the bench, a hammer with a square head and a short handle. This one, at least, looks manageable. You lift it. Oh, no.
It is not manageable. The hammer weighs roughly as much as a newborn sheep, and that's before you even swing it. You lower it quickly to avoid dropping it on your own foot, although your master watches you like he's waiting for exactly that mistake to happen. "Try the smaller one," he says. You glance at the smaller one, which is only smaller in the same way a boulder is smaller than a mountain. You give it a test lift. Your forearm immediately complains. A fine start.
A quirky historical tidbit surfaces. Some smiths supposedly named their hammers, not out of affection, but to yell at them more effectively during a long day. Names like Old Beater, Gray Snout, or even the miserable one weren't uncommon. You consider naming yours Back Pain in advance. Your master demonstrates by picking up one of his own hammers, twice the size of yours, and swinging it with the ease of someone brushing crumbs off a table. The strike rings out in a bright, sharp tone that vibrates all the way to your teeth. He nods at you. Your turn.
You step up to the anvil, take a deep breath, and lift your hammer. You aim at the edge of a small iron bar he's placed for you to practice on. Your grip shifts slightly. Your fingers haven't quite figured out their job yet. You swing anyway. The hammer lands with a thud that's more of a tired sigh than a crisp strike. The iron barely dents. Your master raises one eyebrow, an expression so subtle it feels like a full critique of your life choices. You swing again, and again, and again. Each time, the hammer vibrates in your palms, sending a faint buzzing up your arm like a bee trapped in your sleeve. Medieval smithing doesn't just involve brute strength. It requires precision, rhythm, and an impressive tolerance for pain. Your hands feel like they're going numb and waking up at the same time, a sensation no one asked for. Your master eventually stops you, guiding your grip with a surprisingly gentle push. Here, this way. His hands position yours, thumbs aligned, fingers wrapped firmly but not strangling the handle, wrist straight. It feels immediately more stable, less like the hammer is trying to escape your grasp. He gives a small nod for you to continue. This time, when you bring the hammer down, the strike feels solid, cleaner, sharper. Sparks jump from the metal like startled fireflies. A tiny smile ghosts across your master's face. You won't call it approval, but maybe polite acknowledgement that you might not be completely hopeless. Then come the chisels. You pick one up, expecting something light and precise. Instead, you discover a chisel is really just a short, angry stick of iron that's been sharpened with bad intentions. The tip gleams faintly in the forge light, and when you press your thumb against it, your master slaps your hand away. "Don't test sharp things with skin," he says. Reasonable. He sets the chisel on the hot iron bar and instructs you to strike it with the hammer. You do, slightly off target. The chisel wobbles, jumps, and nearly slips off the anvil. That earns you a sigh deep enough to blow out a candle. Hold it steady. "I'm trying," you mutter. The chisel continues to wobble like a baby deer on wet grass. This time, the strike is better. The chisel bites into the glowing iron, throwing off tiny sparks. Your master gives a small grunt that might, possibly, in a generous interpretation, be approval. But you're sweating through your shirt again, and the tools aren't done with you yet. He brings out the punch next. The punch is deceiving, small, round-ended, innocent-looking. You pick it up thinking this will be easy. Then you accidentally touch the wrong end of the punch, the one that had been left near the forge, and recoil instantly. Your fingertips tingle. It's not hot enough to burn, but hot enough to remind you that every object in this workshop is out to get you. You blow on your fingers and pretend you meant to do that for educational purposes. Historians still argue whether apprentices received formal tool training or were simply thrown into the heat and expected to figure things out. Judging from your morning, you suspect the latter. Every tool in your hands feels slightly rebellious, slightly too heavy, slightly too sharp, or not sharp enough. Nothing is exactly right, and everything requires finesse you don't yet have. Your master decides it's time to see how you handle the full trio: tongs, hammer, and anvil. You pick up the tongs again, grip the iron bar, and lift it from the forge. It's glowing orange, radiating heat that prickles your skin. You walk, carefully, slowly, to the anvil. Halfway there, the iron slips. You make a small panicked noise you hope your master didn't hear. He heard. Grip tighter. I am gripping tighter. Grip correctly. You adjust your hand. The iron stays in place. Barely. You place it on the anvil, lift your hammer, and begin striking. The iron flattens slightly under your blows. The sound rings out in a steady rhythm, metallic and echoing. Your arms burn. Your shoulders ache. Your tongs dig into your palm. You're sweating again. You're nearly crying. And you're only on your third tool lesson. A second light joke surfaces unbidden. Congratulations! You've unlocked the arm shaking like gelatin stage of blacksmith training. But slowly, very slowly, the iron begins to take shape. Not well, not evenly, but it's changing, and that's what matters. After several minutes, your master takes the tools from your hands, inspects the piece you made, and gives a curt nod. Not awful. You beam internally at this glowing compliment. The tools still feel like enemies. They're heavy, unwieldy, and unpredictably hot. But as you flex your aching fingers, you start to sense something else. A strange, stubborn pride. These tools may fight you, but they're the only bridge between raw iron and something useful. And someday, though not today, you might even learn to wield them without dropping, burning, bruising, or mildly injuring yourself. By the time your hands stop trembling from your latest battle with the tongs and hammer, your master decides it's time to teach you the real heart of the forge, the fire itself. You thought the tools were unruly? The forge fire is a full character, temperamental, needy, and hotter than your worst summer memory. It breathes, it sulks, it spits sparks when offended, and it absolutely knows when you're new. You can already feel it sizing you up as you walk toward it, like a cat deciding whether to tolerate a new roommate. Your master stands beside the open hearth, nudging the coals with a long iron poker. The fire responds with a slow, simmering sigh. You swear the glowing embers pulse like they're listening. Fire is your partner, your master says, though his tone suggests this is more a warning than encouragement. Feed it wrong, and it fights you. You nod, though partner feels generous when you're fairly certain this fire would eat your eyebrows for breakfast if given the chance. He gestures for you to kneel beside him. The heat slams into your face with a force that makes your forehead instantly damp. Even breathing feels thick. You lean in anyway, squinting through the shimmering air as he parts the top layer of coals. Beneath the surface, the deeper coals glow a bright, molten orange, hot enough to warp iron and probably your self-esteem. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Medieval forges typically used charcoal, not coal, because charcoal burned hotter and cleaner, making it ideal for shaping iron. Unfortunately, charcoal also produced very fine dust, which now coats your nostrils like spicy soot. You sniff. Your master side-eyes you. Don't inhale so close. Right, noted. The forge smell has officially moved into your sinuses and is currently rearranging furniture. He places a cold iron bar into your hands. You'll learn to control the heat today, he says. Too cold and the metal won't move. Too hot and it crumbles. You stare at the glowing coals. Crumbles? He nods, turns to useless flakes. Wonderful. You're juggling iron's version of butter. One wrong move and it melts or burns or falls apart. Honestly, relatable. You slide the bar into the coals using the long tongs. Immediately, the heat intensifies, like you've opened the medieval sauna run by someone who hates you. You adjust its angle, making sure the iron disappears evenly beneath the charcoal. Your master watches closely, arms crossed, waiting for you to do something questionable. It won't take long. The coals shift with a soft hiss as you feed air to them using the bellows. You pump gently at first. The fire brightens just a little, licking around the metal like a curious animal. You keep going, steady, rhythmic squeezes. The air from the bellows roars into the heart of the forge and the coals flare. Now the heat is so intense you feel it pressing against you, radiating through your clothing, warming your kneecaps. That's enough, your master says. You stop. The fire settles into a steady glow, alive and hungry, but not angry. Now test it, he instructs. You pull the iron bar out slightly, revealing its color. It glows a deep red, warm but not yet malleable. Your master shakes his head. Back in. You return it to the coals. Heat rushes over your hands, even with the length of the tongs between you and the fire. You keep pumping the bellows, slowly, carefully. The fire brightens again, the color shifting from deep red to cherry, then to bright orange. You pull the iron out once more. The color dances along the surface like living light. Your master nods. Good. You beam internally at this extremely mild compliment. But then he says, now keep it that way. Oh no. You quickly discover that temperature control is blacksmithing's worst minigame. The iron cools down faster than you expect. By the time you turn to the anvil, it's already fading from orange to red. You freeze. Panic flutters in your chest. The metal is cooling. Your master raises an eyebrow. Move. You scramble back to the forge, shoving the iron into the coals again. You pump the bellows too hard this time, and the fire erupts, sending sparks flying like angry bees. One lands on your sleeve. You slap it quickly. Another lands on your shoe. You stomp. Your master shakes his head. Gentle, he reminds you. Fire likes respect. Right, fire likes respect, and possibly sacrifices. Historians still argue whether medieval apprentices were taught fire management early or only after they'd proven they could handle tools. You suspect it depends entirely on the master's mood. Today, your master appears to be in the trial by fire, literally, mood. As the iron heats again, you wipe your forehead with your sleeve. A streak of soot smears across your skin. You're starting to look like a raccoon who moonlights as a chimney sweep. The forge's glow bathes everything in a warm, flickering light, and for a moment, you almost feel cozy until sweat drips into your eye and stings like betrayal. Finally, the iron reaches a glowing yellow-orange, the perfect working temperature. You hurry to the anvil, tongs clamp tight. You set the bar down and bring your hammer down with a satisfying strike. The iron moves beautifully this time, spreading under the force. Sparks scatter, your heart races. For a second, you feel like a real blacksmith. Then the color fades, quickly, too quickly. Your master says nothing. He simply points at the forge. You plunge the metal back into the fire, realizing that maintaining heat while working is an endless loop. Heat, hammer, repeat. Drop the temperature and you lose precious time. Overheat it and you ruin the piece. The perfect middle ground lasts approximately 2 seconds. A second light joke floats into your thoughts. Fire management feels like trying to toast bread without burning it, except the bread is iron and your toaster is trying to kill you. Your master steps beside you and guides your hands as you adjust the bar's position in the coals. Find the hottest zone, he murmurs. You shift slightly. The fire flickers. A deeper orange blooms in the center of the bed. There, he taps your wrist lightly. Remember that spot. You struggle to memorize the precise angle, depth, and distance. It feels like trying to remember the exact softness of a pillow from 2 nights ago. But slowly, very slowly, you begin to understand the fire's rhythm. You learn how to read the shifting colors, how to listen to the subtle sound of coals cracking, how to gently coax the flame rather than bully it. You learn to watch for the moment when the iron surface sweats, tiny shimmering waves that indicate the perfect forging temperature. You learn to avoid the dreaded sparking white when iron burns and flakes. You even learn that tipping the bellows slightly changes the airflow. Fire is picky. As you work, a quirky fringe tidbit pops up in your mind. Some medieval smiths believed that speaking softly to the fire helped keep it calm. Others believed certain songs encouraged hotter flames. You are not above whispering positive affirmations at this point. The fire still nips at you. It still blasts heat into your face, still surprises you with sparks, still threatens your arm hair. But for the first time, you feel a flicker of something new: cooperation. By midday, your clothes are drenched, your hands ache, and your eyes sting from the radiant glow. Yet you manage to keep the iron at a steady working temperature longer than ever before. Your master notices. "Better," he says. That's practically a standing ovation. You straighten your aching back and wipe sweat from your temple, feeling a strange swell of pride. You've survived your first real dance with the fire. It hasn't killed you, and you haven't ruined anything today, yet. And as you place the iron back in the coals, watching the orange bloom rise once more, you realize something important. You're beginning to understand the forge. Or at least it hasn't eaten you. That's progress. You move into the next stretch of your long day, still wiping the sting of soot from your eyes as you glance toward the forge. The fire crouches there like a sleepy animal, orange, dull, almost tame. But you already know better. It's waiting to be fed, to be coaxed, to be pleaded with, like some medieval version of a needy house cat that just happens to be made entirely of flame. And as you approach, the heat deepens, pooling around you in slow waves that wrap your skin. You don't even need to touch anything yet. Just standing here is enough to feel your socks starting to get ideas about melting. You grab a basket of charcoal, your precious, overpriced, always disappearing charcoal, and pour a careful scoop into the mouth of the fire. It hisses and brightens, coming alive instantly. That's when it clicks for you. This forge isn't just a tool. It's a full-time creature with opinions, moods, and a genuinely concerning appetite. And you're responsible for making sure it stays fed, warm, and not too warm, because otherwise your whole day slips into chaos. The annoying part is that charcoal isn't cheap. Historically, people really did burn through mountains of the stuff just to keep one forge running. Entire forests were chopped down, slowly turned into charcoal in earth-covered piles, and sold to smiths who needed cartloads of it just to survive the week. And because you don't own a forest, what, are you a wealthy noble now? You're stuck negotiating with a charcoal burner who already knows he has you in a supply chokehold, which explains why you owe him 3 hinges and a promise you absolutely can't keep. Next week's rate will be lower. It won't. It never is. You stir the fire with your iron poker, watching the color shift from sleepy orange to the sharper, more aggressive yellow that means the forge is warming properly. It's easy to imagine it purring, if purring sounded like a dragon clearing its throat. The moment the brighter heat washes over you, sweat beads instantly across your forehead. Your shirt clings to your back in that "you're definitely not wearing this to dinner later" sort of way. And your hands start to feel tacky with the midst of soot and moisture. Every blacksmith had to master fire management because without the right heat, iron simply refuses to listen. Too cool and it becomes stubborn, like trying to bend a crowbar at room temperature. Too hot and the iron burns, turning crumbly and useless. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths relied more on instinct or experience to judge temperatures, but you quickly learn your own method. You squint at the color of the iron and hope you're right. It's very scientific. You feed the furnace again, learning how the charcoal collapses inward as it burns, leaving you reaching for another scoop and then another. It continues like that for hours. Charcoal in, smoke up, heat out, until the fire becomes the steady heartbeat of the workshop. You don't get to sit and admire your handiwork, of course. You're already back to clearing ash, checking airflow, and adjusting the bellows. And those bellows, they are the lungs of the forge, ancient and creaky and loud enough that you sometimes wonder if the medieval neighbors gossiped about the constant wheezing coming from your shop. Maybe they assumed you were raising a sick horse. You press down on the bellows handle, forcing air into the bed of coals and watching the fire leap like it's trying to impress someone. A blast of sparks flies upward, and you instinctively duck, because yes, sparks absolutely will land in your hair if given the chance. Some medieval texts mention smiths keeping buckets of sand nearby for safety, not because they were expecting to spontaneously combust, but because they knew stray sparks could light dry thatch like it was dipped in oil. So your bucket stays at the ready, though at this point it's mostly full of regrets and the nails you dropped earlier. As the fire brightens, a wave of heat washes across your hands so strongly that you feel your knuckles tighten. This place is always warm, but now it's suffocating, like working inside a bread oven. And just as you blink through the distortions of the rising air, your mind wanders to a quirky historical tidbit. Some medieval smithing legends suggested that salamanders lived inside fire. Tiny, magical salamanders who were immune to heat and danced among flames. As you stare at the swirling sparks, you totally get why people believe that. Except your salamander today is more like a frantic spark that lands on your sleeve and makes you do the least majestic hand swatting dance imaginable. Still, despite the danger and the sweat and the increasingly expensive charcoal situation, you settle into a rhythm. Feed, stoke, pump, watch, repeat. There's something hypnotic about it, something that sinks into your pulse until you're matching the fire's breath. It's almost peaceful. Well, peaceful in that way where you're close to being lightly cooked, but you've made your peace with it because, hey, this is the job now. You glance toward the sack where you're keeping the last batch of charcoal. It's already half empty. Of course it is. You swear the forge must be eating it for fun. And you know that once it runs low, you either make a stressful trip to the charcoal burner or start burning random scrap wood that won't give you the heat you need. Every smith dealt with that tension. Too little fuel means iron cools fast, tools break easier, and customers wonder why their order is late. Too much fuel means you're poor and sweating over a fire that's hotter than the gossip about the miller's wife. But you keep going, because you have to. You squint through the heat shimmer, shove another scoop of charcoal into the glowing heart of the forge, and listen to it crunch and hiss before sinking into the flame. The fire brightens once more, obedient for now, and you exhale slowly, feeling your shoulders drop in the smallest hint of relief. For one fleeting second, it's almost cozy, almost comforting. Then another spark snaps against your boot, and you're immediately reminded why this job was, historically speaking, the opposite of a spa day. You roll your shoulders, already aching from the constant babysitting of the forge, and take a slow step toward the anvil. It waits there like a silent judge, massive, cold, and absolutely not sympathetic to your suffering. The hammer lies beside it, heavier than it looked this morning, as if it has somehow gained emotional weight along with physical mass. You pick it up anyway. That's your life now. Lifting things that don't want to be lifted and hitting things that don't want to be hit. The first swing comes down with a satisfying clang that ripples through the workshop, vibrating in your bones all the way down to your toes. For a brief moment, you feel powerful, like you're stirring some ancient force, awakening the ghost of craftsmanship itself. Then the shock travels back into your wrist, and your entire hand goes numb, and suddenly you're less ancient master of iron and more person who wishes hammers had built-in cushioning. This is hammer time all the time. Every medieval smith lived in this repetitive rhythm: heat, strike, turn, repeat. Even a single nail demanded an absurd number of steps, and hinges? Don't even ask. That's an entire afternoon of polite aggression, shaping iron that behaves like it has its own opinions about the world. The mainstream historical fact here is simple. Blacksmiths didn't just make weapons, they made everything. Nails, tools, horseshoes, door latches, locks, chains, cooking pots. Basically, if it was made of iron, someone like you had to spend hours sweating over it. You bring the glowing iron to the anvil again, positioning it with your tongs. The metal radiates a heat that feels like standing beside the sun wearing 3 sweaters. You swing, the hammer lands, sparks jump, and your whole arm yells at you in language you're pretty sure isn't PG-13. You take another swing anyway, because if you stop now, the iron cools and becomes impossible to shape. It's like working with cookie dough that instantly turns to rock the moment you hesitate. There's no room for daydreaming here, even though your brain dearly wants to drift off and imagine, I don't know, a medieval hammock? You strike again, and again, and again. The sound becomes a kind of rhythm, the deep thud of iron shifting shape, the quick clinks as the hammer glances off an edge, the hiss when a spark touches your skin. It's the music of your new life, and whether you like it or not, you're learning the dance steps. Historians still argue whether medieval smiths developed unique striking patterns depending on region. Some claim Anglo-Saxon smiths favored heavy, deliberate blows, while others say continental smiths used faster, rhythmic strikes. But all agree on one thing: your arm is going to be sore later. Like, very sore. The kind of sore where tomorrow morning you consider renaming yourself Lefty and doing everything with your non-dominant hand for the rest of your natural life. You pause to flex your fingers, noticing the tingling numbness fading back into a more familiar kind of aching. As a little side note, here comes your porky tidbit of the section. In some parts of Europe, blacksmiths were believed to have supernatural strength or even charm-like protection because they worked with fire and metal. Some villagers genuinely thought touching a smith's hammer could bring luck. As you look at your throbbing knuckles and sweat-dampened hair, you can't help but think, yes, clearly you are a mystical being radiating great fortune, especially the fortune of back pain. You bring the iron back to the forge to reheat it, because this process is never just one round of hammering. The metal has cooled to a deep red, still warm but no longer pliable. It needs to brighten again, rising into that yellow-orange sweet spot that means it's soft enough to shape without cracking. And the moment you put it back into the fire, the forge practically inhales it, like it's thrilled to be eating metal instead of charcoal for once. The heat stings your face when you lean in. Your eyelashes feel like they're curling. Meanwhile, behind you, the anvil waits like a stern parent ready to ask why you aren't back at work yet. You pump the bellows a few times. The fire roars. The metal shifts colors again, and you brace yourself for round 2. Another trip to the anvil, another series of blows. Your rhythm starts to slip into something hypnotic. The world narrows to just your breathing, the ringing metal, and the flicker of orange reflecting off the workshop walls. The soot, the sweat, the cramped muscles, they fade into a dull hum beneath the repetition of the task. You're shaping a simple bar today, but even something simple requires precision. Each blow has to land just right, or else the metal warps, bends, or creates weak points. And weak points mean unhappy customers, and unhappy customers mean awkward conversations where someone threatens to tell the bailiff that you ruined their best plowshare. No pressure though. You reposition the metal, turning it with your tongs, the edges flaring brighter than the center. You tap one corner gently, then harder. The shape starts to emerge, a small curve, a narrowing taper. You're almost impressed with yourself, until your hammer slips by a fraction of an inch and hits the wrong spot, sending an irritating jolt up your arm and undoing part of your progress. At this point, you'd like to file a complaint with the Ironworkers Union, except it's the Middle Ages and guilds mostly just tell you what you can't do. But you keep working, because the job doesn't care whether your shoulders are tired or your patience is thin. The iron doesn't pause out of sympathy. The hammer doesn't lighten itself just because you've already hit your quota of accidental thumb bumps today. You swing because you must. The repetition isn't punishment.
It's simply the nature of this world. After a long stretch, long enough that you're sweating from places you didn't realize had sweat glands, you stop to check your progress. The shape is coming together. Not pretty, but functional. And in medieval smithing, that's most of the battle won. Beauty was optional. Stability was required. You take a moment to rub the back of your neck, blinking through the heat haze. The air shimmers. Your shirt feels glued to you. You think, briefly, that if this whole blacksmith thing doesn't work out, maybe you can start a medieval spa where people pay you to stand near a forge and sweat out their sins. Though, knowing medieval crowds, someone would definitely accuse you of sorcery. You place the iron into the quench bucket, not for its final hardening, but just to cool enough that you can handle it. The hiss is sharp and dramatic, steam billowing upward like you've just summoned a very confused ghost. The bucket water smells faintly metallic, mixed with whatever random debris has fallen in today. You pull the piece out, now lukewarm and slightly darker, and set it aside. One project in progress, several more to go, and the day isn't even close to over. You flex your fingers again, your knuckles crack. A wave of fatigue rolls through your shoulders, but you know you're settling into the grind of the work, the stubborn, repetitive, rhythmic labor that defines every medieval blacksmith's life. Hammer time is constant. It's exhausting. It's relentless. And as you glance toward the forge, already calling you back like a needy, fiery toddler, you know one thing for sure. Dinner tonight better be excellent. You barely get a moment to stretch your aching fingers before the first customer of the day wanders into your workshop. You hear them before you see them. The scuff of boots on dirt, the throat clearing of someone clearly preparing to be unreasonable. You sigh softly, preparing your most polite medieval customer service voice, which is basically just normal speech but with slightly more tolerance. The customer steps inside, blinking through the haze of smoke drifting across your workspace. It doesn't matter how hard you try to keep the ventilation flowing, the air in here always looks like it's been borrowed from a campfire. The customer coughs once and immediately launches into the kind of request that reminds you why being a medieval blacksmith wasn't a peaceful monastic lifestyle. They jab a finger toward a bundle wrapped in cloth. "My old plowshare broke," they declare. "I need a new one by tomorrow, and it needs to be lighter and stronger." They say cheaper like they're doing you a huge favor. You blink. The mental math doesn't add up. Lighter and stronger? For the same price as a loaf of bread? You resist the urge to ask if they also wanted to glow in the dark or sing lullabies to their crops. Instead, you nod slowly, because medieval life has taught you that the quickest way to a headache is telling someone their expectations are unrealistic. This is the part every smith dreaded. Not the hammering, not the burns, not the threat of iron splinters. No, it was the customers. Medieval villagers could be astonishingly precise about what they wanted, even when what they wanted wasn't physically possible. And because you rely on their business, you can't exactly tell them to go pound sand with their bare hands. You unwrap the broken plowshare, snapped clean across the middle, a typical failure. It happens when someone insists on plowing rocky soil that has a personal vendetta against metal. You turn it over in your hands, murmuring something appropriately wise-sounding. The customer waits expectantly, their arms crossed in the universal sign of, "I want miracles and I want them discounted." You explain, gently, that repairs take time. The customer frowns. They tell you their neighbor's cousin's brother once got a plow repaired in half a day. You smile politely because this is the medieval version of someone saying, "Well, I saw online that it should only take 5 minutes." Historians still argue whether medieval smiths inflated estimates on purpose or truly needed that much time. But honestly, you could use a long nap and a slightly higher hourly rate, so your estimate definitely leans toward caution. You set the broken tool aside, assuring the customer you'll see what can be done. It's vague, diplomatic, and gives you wiggle room when reality inevitably wins the fight. But before the customer even leaves, the next one steps in, a farmer carrying a bucket of horseshoes. The horseshoes rattle like someone is shaking a metal skeleton. "These need straightening," the farmer says. Bessie walks funny. You glance inside. The shoes are not just bent, they're shaped like someone tried using them as frisbees. You want to ask how poor Bessie is functioning at all, but maybe she's just emotionally resilient. Or confused. The farmer wants them fixed within the hour. Of course they do. As you set the bucket down, yet another customer pokes her head in. This one is holding a sword. A long, very shiny, very expensive sword. It needs sharpening, they say proudly, like they forged it themselves. They angle it dangerously close to your elbow, and you take a casual but meaningful step back. "Can you make the edge stronger?" they ask. You inhale slowly through your nose. Stronger. Right. You're starting to think that medieval villagers believed blacksmiths could bend the laws of physics through sheer force of personality. You try to explain that sharpening makes the edge thinner, and thinner edges may chip more easily. They stare at you as if you're revealing forbidden magic. Your quirky tidbit for the moment. Some medieval folklore claimed blacksmiths could enchant blades, making them sharper or unbreakable simply through willpower. As you look at this person's hopeful face, you understand how those legends started. People wanted miracles, and smiths were the closest thing to everyday wizards they had. You take the sword carefully from their hands, promising to give it an excellent sharpening. Internally, you are absolutely planning to add "please don't hit rocks with it" to your closing instructions. As the customers filter out, your workshop finally falls quiet again, except for the omnipresent crackle of your forge and the faint metallic ring still lingering in your ears. But of course, the peace lasts about 6 seconds. Another villager appears, dragging behind them what appears to be a door. A whole door. It has a hinge hanging off by a thread, like it's given up on life. "This needs fixing," the villager says, "and I need it done by evening because the goats keep getting into my house." You stare at the hinge. Metal fatigue, overuse, maybe goat-related mischief. You nod. They add, "Can you make it so the door doesn't squeak?" You smile weakly, reminding yourself that you are a professional. If you had a copper coin for every time someone asked for a squeak-proof hinge, you could have retired already and opened that medieval hammock spa you imagined earlier. You jot down the order in your mental ledger: plowshare, horseshoes, sword edge, door hinge. It's not even noon yet, and you already have a small mountain of tasks piling up. You half expect someone to walk in asking for a metal contraption that solves arguments with their spouse or cooks vegetables faster. You get back to your anvil, but the weight of expectations lingers like smoke. Blacksmiths weren't just metal workers, they were problem solvers for an entire community. You were part craftsman, part therapist, part miracle attempt performer. And people rarely understood how much labor went into even the simplest items. You hammer out a few basic nails because you'll need them for the hinge repair later. Nails are your bread and butter, simple, quick, and always in demand. But even nails require finesse. Too brittle, and they snap. Too soft, and they bend. You already know someone will complain if they bend a nail by slamming it in sideways, but you also know they'll blame you anyway. You pause for a moment, letting your hammer hand relax. You think to yourself that maybe tomorrow you'll put a little sign on the door that reads, "Miracles take longer," and cost extra. But for now, you lift your hammer again because the customers are waiting and the iron isn't going to shape itself. If it could, you'd have retired by now. You step out from behind your anvil for a moment, just long enough to catch a breath of slightly fresher air near the doorway and immediately remember why you rarely do this. The street outside isn't exactly peaceful. It hums with voices, cartwheels, animals that do not believe in personal space, and the occasional vendor shouting about onions like they're holding the last treasure of civilization. But you're here for a reason. Market day. The day when you, a medieval blacksmith with a suspiciously growing pile of debt to the charcoal burner, must try to sell your work, haggle with customers, and navigate the delicate gray zone between honest trade and, let's call it, creative accounting. You gather a small basket of finished items, nails, a few hinges, a pair of iron hooks, a ladle that came out surprisingly round for once, and step out into the bustle. The air smells like livestock, baking bread, and the kind of sweat created by too many humans sharing too little space. You merge into the crowd, moving carefully so you don't jab anyone with the corner of a hinge. Last time you accidentally bumped someone, they thought you were attacking them with a tiny metal rectangle. The marketplace spreads before you in a patchwork of stalls covered with faded cloths. A row of fishmongers argues loudly about who has the freshest catch. A woman selling pottery stares suspiciously at everyone who walks too close to her fragile wares. A dog wanders between legs, hoping someone drops a sausage. The whole scene feels alive, chaotic, and only occasionally sticky. You find a small spot near a cart of apples and set down your basket carefully. Before you can even clear your throat to begin the medieval equivalent of a sales pitch, someone stops, squints into your basket, and immediately frowns. "What's this one?" they ask, pointing to a hook you're slightly proud of. "A wall hook," you answer. "Good for hanging tools, pots, herbs." "It looks crooked." You blink. It's not crooked. If anything, it's the straightest hook you've made all month. But this is just part of the game. Medieval customers love to start negotiations by insulting your work. Apparently, it softens the smith, like tenderizing meat. You calmly reply, "It's straight." They tilt their head. "It could be straighter." You sigh inwardly, because this is the medieval version of someone offering you $3 for a brand new item because they saw something similar cheaper online. Except online doesn't exist, and the person they're referring to is probably someone's nephew who once bent a piece of scrap metal and declared himself an artisan. But haggling is expected, and you need the coins, so you lower the price slightly. The customer nods, satisfied that they have won this intense battle of wills, and hands you a few small coins. You drop them into your pouch, which makes a very unconvincing jingle. As you rearrange your basket, a shady-looking man sidles up to you, hood down low, hands tucked into his sleeves, gaze shifting side to side like he's waiting for a dramatic soundtrack. He leans in. "You got any extras?" he whispers. You have no idea what extras means in this context. Horseshoes? Nails? Secret knives? A portable iron miracle device that solves all household arguments? Before you can ask, he clarifies in the smallest voice. "Lockpicks." Ah, yes, the gray zone of medieval smithing. Technically, you're not supposed to make lockpicks unless you're commissioned by someone with authority. But that didn't stop people from asking. And blacksmiths throughout history often found themselves in this morally ambiguous area, making tools that could be used for reasonable purposes, or definitely unmistakably criminal ones. Historians still argue whether most smiths refused such requests outright or quietly made a profit under the table. You stand there considering your options, the man staring at you like a hawk watching a mouse that may or may not be edible. After a long pause, you say the safest possible sentence. "I don't make those." He nods, perhaps disappointed, perhaps relieved you didn't ask too many questions, and drifts back into the crowd. You exhale slowly, only now realizing how tense your shoulders were. A few moments later, a woman approaches with a more reasonable request. She wants nails, lots of nails, enough to fix her roof before winter. You show her the batch you forged earlier, and she inspects them with the seriousness of a jewel appraiser. She turns one over between her fingers, nods in approval, then raises an eyebrow at the price. "Too much," she says. "They're good nails," you reply. "Still, too much."
You lower the price a fraction. She lowers her expectations by exactly 0. This back and forth continues until you're pretty sure you could write a thesis on psychological warfare in medieval bartering. Eventually, she buys them, and you get a handful of coins. Not much, but enough to justify your existence for the day. Then there's the occasional barter attempt. A man once tried to trade you 6 onions and a goat that wasn't actually his. Today, someone offers you a small sack of grain in exchange for a ladle. You consider it. Grain is useful, but grain also attracts rats, and you already have enough rodent drama in your workshop. You politely decline.
Your quirky tidbit of the section arrives in the form of a traveling tinker. He wanders past, juggling spoons in a way that suggests he's done this far too often. He calls out, "Buy a pan, get a song," and immediately begins singing something that may or may not be about a cow who fell in love with a barrel. Medieval markets were weirdly festive like that. Sometimes they were borderline carnivals, complete with impromptu performers, gossip exchanges, and one person who always seemed to be selling medicinal herbs that almost certainly did nothing.
You shift your basket as the afternoon sun grows hotter. The coins you've earned are warm against your hip. Not heavy, definitely not heavy, but present enough to remind you that maybe, just maybe, you'll afford another sack of charcoal before the week ends. Assuming the charcoal burner is in a generous mood, which he never is. A final customer stops by, a young boy, probably sent by his mother, holding a sketch of some vaguely hook-like item. She wants this, he says. She drew it herself. The drawing looks like a snake having an existential crisis. You smile gently. Tell her I will do my best. The boy nods, utterly convinced. As he leaves, you picture yourself forging this wild doodle into something remotely functional. It won't be pretty, but the customer will be happy, and that's the rhythm of your entire profession. By late afternoon, your basket is lighter and your coin pouch slightly heavier. Not much, but enough to buy supper and keep your forge lit another day. You make your way back to your workshop, weaving through the crowd, thinking about how markets are exhausting in a completely different way than smithing. You survive the heat, the haggling, the questionable requests, and the awkward bartering. And somehow, despite the chaos, you feel a strange sense of accomplishment. Not because you sold a lot, but because you navigated the messy social dance of medieval commerce without losing your patience or accidentally selling someone your hammer. As you step back into your workshop's smoky warmth, the sounds of the market fading behind you, you know the real work is still waiting. The forge hisses, the anvil gleams faintly, and the pile of customer orders sits exactly where you left it. Time to dive back into the gray zone, where iron meets expectation, and hope the charcoal holds out. You wake the next morning still feeling the hum of yesterday's exhaustion in your fingertips, like a low-grade vibration that refuses to shut off. Sleep never comes easily when you lie down on straw that crackles and smells faintly of the goats that graciously donated it, but you drag yourself upright anyway. Your muscles protest instantly, your shoulders ache, your lower back mutters something rude. Even your toes seem mad at you. Just another wonderfully average day in the life of a medieval blacksmith. You stretch, if you can call it that, and shuffle toward the forge, already sensing the warmth radiating through the open doorway before you even cross the threshold. Inside, the air sits heavy, thick, and warm, like someone tried to turn the whole workshop into lukewarm soup. You can practically taste the iron even before you touch any tools. This morning's task is chipping scale from yesterday's pile of half-finished nails. Nothing glamorous, nothing heroic, just the equivalent of exfoliating hot metal, only a lot less satisfying than it sounds. You settle into your spot and start tapping away with a rhythm that feels almost meditative, if meditation involved high-risk shrapnel and the occasional splinter of metal ricocheting past your ear. One piece zings off and pings against the wall, scattering dust. It's fine, totally fine. You blink slowly, like someone on the verge of a spiritual awakening, except your spirit is mostly just tired.
By mid-morning, your arms warm to the repetitive motion. You overheat a little, then a little more, then just enough that you start evaluating whether sweating this much technically counts as bathing. A surprising number of medieval villagers might agree that yes, absolutely it does. Mainstream fact of the day: most medieval Europeans did bathe, but not nearly as often as you do after a 10-minute walk to the grocery store. Bathhouses existed, of course, until everyone collectively panicked about moral decay and shut many of them down. You'd think at least one authority figure would have taken one whiff of the average peasant and reconsidered that decision. But here you are, sweating your way through your 6th bath of the week. You take a brief pause to lift the small bucket of sand you keep beside the anvil. You drag your hands through it, letting the grit brush away sweat and grime. It feels oddly refreshing, like a spa treatment invented by someone who hates luxury. Then you return to the nails. More tapping, more scraping, more tiny sparks flicking into the air like sleepy fireflies that just want to be anywhere else. While you work, loud voices spill in from outside. 2 customers arguing about whether the sword they ordered should favor cutting or thrusting. Historians still argue whether most medieval swords were primarily used for slicing or stabbing in real everyday combat, which honestly makes you feel better because these villagers clearly have no idea either. You quietly hope they choose stabbing because it means a narrower blade and slightly less grinding for you. But they go back and forth, insisting on contradictory features as if they're designing an all-purpose kitchen gadget, not a weapon. A 3rd voice joins them. It's the baker, popping his head inside to ask whether you'll fix the iron hoop on his flour barrel again. This will make the 5th time this year. You internally sigh, but outwardly you give a smile so polite it borders on saintly. The barrel hoop somehow always breaks the moment he fills it, suggesting one of 2 things. Either you're a terrible blacksmith, or the baker is wildly abusing this poor piece of metal. You're banking on the second. You add his request to your mental list, which now stretches longer than the village gossip chain. As you return to chipping scale, you hear a rhythmic clop outside. A horse approaches. A rather important one, based on the confident cadence of its hooves. You peer out the door just enough to see the manor steward, riding like he's on his way to inform someone of their overdue taxes, which in your case, he absolutely is. He dismounts, straightens his coat, and steps inside with all the grace of someone who has never had to lift anything heavier than a quill. He tells you that Lord Bernard expects those decorative gate hinges by the end of the week. Hinges you haven't even started because you've been drowning in nail repairs, pot mending, horseshoe replacements, barrel hoops, and the existential question of why your left shoe always feels worse than your right by midday. To compensate for this sudden surge in prestigious obligations, you work faster, a little too fast. At one point, you swing the hammer slightly off-center, and the nail pops out of the tongs with dramatic enthusiasm, landing somewhere behind the pile of scrap. You consider retrieving it, then you consider your knees, then you nope your way out of that idea and just grab another blank. No one will notice if the final count is off by 1. Probably. A tiny fly drifts in from outside, weaving lazily in the warm air. You give a half-hearted blow to shoo it away. It ignores you completely because of course it does. The fly seems particularly interested in hovering dangerously close to your eye, and you start imagining medieval monks debating whether flies are tiny agents of chaos designed specifically to test blacksmiths. Quirky tidbit for the day. Some early bestiaries claimed that flies originated from rotting meat spontaneously, which was absolutely not true, but must have been a comforting excuse for anyone whose housekeeping skills weren't exactly stellar. By noon, the sun slants through the doorway in narrow golden ribbons, turning the dust motes into floating sparks that drift lazily upward. You stare at them for a moment, letting your eyes unfocus.
You allow yourself one tiny stretch, then another, then a longer one that involves you leaning back so far your spine pops softly. One of those weirdly satisfying pops that makes you briefly question whether you just healed yourself or broke something permanently. You step outside for a breath of not forge air. The village feels calmer today. Someone is hanging laundry. Someone else is mending a roof, banging their own nails in with a speed that makes you both proud and slightly worried for your business. You wipe your hands on your apron and admire the mild breeze brushing your skin. A single bird chirps. Peaceful, quiet, almost too quiet. You glance at your workshop. There's still a stack of unfinished work waiting for you, looming like a judgmental metal mountain. But for just a few seconds, you let your mind float. The warmth of the forge clings to you. The air outside cools you. And for a moment, you exist in perfect thermal confusion. Then you sigh, turn, and trudge back inside, because medieval blacksmithing waits for no one, least of all you. The afternoon stretches ahead. More nails, more sanding, more heat, more sweat. Another day in the forge, and somehow you're still going. Mostly because you have to, partly because your hands don't know how to stop, and partly because, against all odds, you've started to find a strange rhythm in it all. A rhythm that makes the work feel quietly meaningful, even if it still absolutely, objectively sucks. By mid-afternoon, you've accepted that fatigue isn't going anywhere today. Your arms are heavy, your shoulders ache in new, creative ways, and your fingers feel like they're composed of iron shavings instead of flesh. You return to the anvil, hammer in hand, and try to convince yourself that the day's monotony has a certain meditative charm. But the forge has other ideas. It hisses and flares as if reminding you who really controls the temperature, the sparks, and more importantly, your sanity. You place a new bar of iron in the coals and watch it slowly absorb the heat. You notice the way the edges glow first, a sort of shy orange before the heart of the bar blooms a fuller yellow. You remember your master's words, learn to read the fire. It's advice you understand intellectually, but emotionally it still feels like negotiating with a very picky dragon who happens to be fond of occasionally biting the nearest appendage. A historical note. Blacksmiths in medieval Europe often relied on visual cues from the metal's color rather than thermometers, which didn't exist, to judge working temperature. A dangerous game of intuition and timing. And somehow, you're still mostly alive, which counts for something. As the iron reaches the perfect hue, you lift it with tongs and set it on the angle. The first strike resonates through your chest, a sharp clang that carries with it the satisfaction of work actually being done. Your arms protest, but you press on. You are painfully aware that every blow counts. Too light, and the metal refuses to bend. Too heavy, and it may warp, crack, or spit sparks that could easily land in your hair, clothes, or, worst of all, your eye. Every strike is a negotiation, a compromise, a tiny battle fought between your will and the stubbornness of iron. Some smiths believe that singing softly while hammering could influence the shape of the metal. It's not scientifically proven, but as you hum a little tune, you notice the sparks seem to leap in rhythm with your voice. You smile to yourself, allowing a brief daydream where your forge doubles as a concert hall and the metal performs obediently like a very well-trained orchestra. And then there's the subtle, constant hazard, sparks. They are unpredictable, like tiny explosive creatures with an agenda. One lands on your sleeve and you slap it instinctively. Another lands in the sand bucket and hisses aggressively. Sparks are like tiny little life lessons in pain, tolerance, and reflex training. Except medieval blacksmiths didn't exactly get a medal for avoiding minor burns. Historians still argue whether apprentices were taught spark etiquette or if surviving the first year was considered sufficient training. Your attention is interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside. A familiar voice calls over the din of the street. A neighbor,
seeking a repair on a simple metal latch. The latch is delicate, but the woman insists it must be fixed today because her children keep opening the pantry door at inopportune moments. You nod and add it to your mental ledger. The work is simple, but the timeline is tight. Pressure is a constant companion. You feel it pressing against your back like an unseen smithing hammer. You return to hammering, feeling a rhythm begin to develop despite the chaos surrounding you. It's the kind of rhythm where your mind starts to drift and parallel with your hands. You think about absurdly mundane things, what you'll have for dinner, whether you'll ever get a full night's sleep again, if the forge ever actually enjoys your company. And somehow, this rhythmic motion is both exhausting and comforting. The hammer swings, the metal sings, and your muscles hum with the repetitive exertion. It's a strange sort of meditation, if meditation involved high temperatures and the risk of blisters.
Another daydream invades. A conversation with a scholar who insists blacksmiths were secretly philosophers, shaping not just iron, but society itself. You snort quietly. Sure, maybe in a poetic sense, but the reality is that your world is defined by heat, sweat, and the occasional complaint about a poorly forged hinge. Philosophical? Perhaps. Exhausting? Absolutely. You glance at the pile of finished items stacked neatly on the side. Hinges, nails, hooks, and a partially completed ladle. Each piece represents a small victory, a brief reprieve from the relentless demands of the forge. Yet there is no time to admire them. Orders are waiting, iron needs attention, and the next hammer strike demands your full concentration. You step back, wipe sweat from your brow, and resume your work, acutely aware that every movement must be precise. At this point, your body has entered a state of semi-autopilot. The arms move with a mechanical precision born from necessity, the hammer falling at regular intervals. Your mind, however, wanders, exploring the absurdity of your circumstances, the constant heat, the unpredictable forge, the demanding villagers, the endless hammering. You chuckle softly, recognizing the strange humor in it all. After all, few professions can claim to combine artistry, manual labor, and daily negotiation with fire. As the afternoon wanes, the light slanting through the workshop windows casts a warm glow on the scattered tools. Shadows stretch and shift, dancing across the walls with the movement of your hammer and the occasional leap of a stray spark. The forge hisses in contentment, or perhaps it's warning you to stay alert. Either way, the rhythm of work, heat, and metal continues unabated. A scholarly debate floats into your mind. Did medieval blacksmiths achieve mastery through natural talent, or was it sheer repetition and experience? You lean toward the latter, silently acknowledging that today, every strike, every adjustment to the fire, every breath of hot air into your lungs is a step toward that mastery, or at least survival. The distinction doesn't matter much when your hands ache and the forge refuses to cooperate. You pause briefly, letting your hammer rest against the anvil, and take a deep breath. Steam rises from the iron in gentle wisps. The smell of charcoal, metal, and sweat mingles in the air, forming an aroma uniquely tied to your craft. It's exhausting, relentless, and strangely grounding. You glance at your hands, calloused and blackened from hours of work, and feel a small, quiet pride. For all the discomfort, for all the chaos, for all the demands, this is your life, and you are surviving it. Then, with a resigned sigh, you pick up the hammer again. The iron waits, the forge waits, and you wait with it. Each strike echoing the rhythm of centuries of blacksmiths who came before, shaping not only metal, but a small piece of history every day. You step back from the anvil for a fraction of a second, wiping sweat from your brow with the back of your soot-stained sleeve. The forge hums, as if sensing the slightest hesitation in your rhythm. It's never forgiving, and today is no exception. You glance at the pile of iron bars waiting to be hammered into hooks, hinges, and the occasional nail for the village market. Each piece seems to glare at you, radiating a heat that makes you question if these metals are secretly sentient. Or maybe you're just losing it. The line is thin, but you suspect blacksmiths historically walked it daily. Your hands ache, shoulders groan, and yet, here you are. The first bar is ready. You grip it with the tongs, feeling the warm metal hum against your skin. Even covered, the heat is persistent, the kind that makes your veins feel like molten rivers. You lay it on the anvil and raise the hammer. The clang echoes, not just in the workshop, but through the thick heat haze that hovers like a slow-moving fog. The sound vibrates up your arm, into your chest, and into the back of your knees. It's not a gentle vibration. It's more like the metal itself is scolding you for hesitation. You hammer, the rhythm slowly sinking into a trance-like state. The motion is repetitive, meditative even, if meditation involved sparks flying into your hair and the constant fear of singed eyebrows. You recall reading that some blacksmiths would hum or chant to help maintain rhythm. You try a soft hum, uncertain if it helps the metal, the forge, or just keeps your own sanity intact. Oddly, it feels like all three. While the heat swirls around you, the smell of iron and burning charcoal clinging to your skin and hair, a small voice interrupts your focus. The apprentice you barely tolerated this morning. He's carrying a tray of tongs and barely avoids tripping over the bucket of sand. "Sir, master," he stammers, "do you want these cleaned?" You take a deep breath, channeling patience you didn't know you had left. Cleaning tongs is straightforward, but it's a distraction from the pressing work on the anvil. Still, historically, every smith had an apprentice. The apprentice learned the rhythm of fire, hammer, and sweat, and in return, you got occasional relief, or at least someone to blame when sparks flew in the wrong direction. You nod once. Set them down carefully. I'll deal with them in a moment. As you resume hammering, your mind drifts to a scholarly debate. Were medieval apprentices considered full contributors to the workshop's productivity, or were they just cheap labor meant to absorb the most painful lessons? Evidence is mixed, but your current observation suggests a little of both. Every strike you take reinforces your own skills, while the apprentice is mostly learning how to not touch the hot iron. The bar begins to take shape under your hammer. It bends, flattens, and narrows just so. Sparks leap, some landing in the sand bucket, some in the forge itself. One spark lands near your ear, and you snap your head aside, narrowly avoiding minor disaster. The forge hisses as if laughing. You mutter something that could count as a medieval curse and continue. A quirky fact surfaces in your foggy, heat-addled mind. Some blacksmiths believe that tapping the metal in a specific pattern could teach it the correct shape. Superstition perhaps, but it's a comforting thought in a day filled with chaos. Maybe the iron listens more than the villagers do. Maybe it's the only thing that does. The apprentice approaches again, this time carrying a small bundle of nails. "Forged yesterday," he says, voice slightly more confident. He's learning. You accept the nails, inspecting a few. Not perfect, but usable. Notably, medieval nails varied widely in quality, and even today, the slightest imperfection could cause a wall to lean or a door to squeak. You sigh. Another lesson for another day. You return your focus to the bar on the anvil. Each strike drives more heat into the metal, shaping it as it gradually accepts the will of your hands. It's exhausting work, but strangely hypnotic. Your arms ache rhythmically, matching the steady pulse of the hammer. Sweat drips down your face and into your collar. Your shirt sticks. Your skin feels like it's slowly becoming one with the workshop itself. And yet, you continue, because if you stop now, the iron cools, and the day's labor is undone. Outside, voices rise. A horse brays. Someone calls for directions. Another customer shouts, vaguely asking if you can mend something before the sun sets. You ignore them all. The forge and anvil demand your full attention. In this trance, time stretches.
The sun moves imperceptibly across the windows. Dust motes dance like tiny floating sparks. And for a fleeting moment, you are not just a blacksmith. You are a conductor, orchestrating the symphony of heat, iron, and relentless labor. Yet fatigue presses harder. Your forearms tremble slightly, and you realize that even when the hammer is heavy, the responsibility feels heavier. Each piece of iron must meet expectations, functional, usable, and hopefully sturdy enough to survive someone's medieval mishaps. You think of the sword you sharpened, the plowshare, the nails, and the hinges. Every project has a story. Every strike of the hammer contributes to that story. And every story reminds you, gently, relentlessly, that your life is a cycle of heat, hammering, and survival. You glance at the forge. It hisses. The fire flares brighter, almost an acknowledgement of your effort. You smile briefly, because for all its tantrums and unpredictability, the forge is an ally in its own strange, fiery way. You adjust the bellows, the motion already instinctive, and the flames lean obediently, bathing the workshop in a warm orange glow. The bar is nearing completion. With each tap and press, the metal bends more willingly. You start to feel the quiet satisfaction of craftsmanship, the kind that comes not from recognition or coin, but from knowing that for a brief, scorching moment, you shaped something useful out of stubborn, unyielding matter. And even as your arms scream in quiet protest, you appreciate the rhythm of the day. Heat, hammer, fire, repetition. It is exhausting, relentless, sometimes absurd, but undeniably, unmistakably yours. The day begins to wane, though the forge refuses to acknowledge any sense of time other than the pulse of the metal and the clang of the hammer. You wipe your brow and stretch, feeling every muscle in your back and arms singing in perfect, painful harmony. The forge hisses a little louder, like a petulant companion reminding you that the work is far from over. You take a slow step toward the anvil, hands still blackened from coal dust, and adjust the tongs around the nearly finished bar of iron. It feels heavier than it looks, a testament to the heat it has absorbed and the stubbornness of raw metal. The bar resists your first strike, bending slightly in a way that requires careful attention. You tap it gently, feeling the subtle shift beneath the hammer before striking more decisively. Sparks fly in erratic bursts, some landing harmlessly in the sand bucket, others sizzling against your sleeve. The hissing of the forge, combined with the ringing of your hammer, forms a peculiar symphony. You allow your mind to wander briefly, humming a quiet tune to keep pace with the rhythm. A quirky historical note drifts in that singing could influence the metal, a notion probably born more from superstition than science. But today, it serves to maintain your own sanity as much as any mystical effect. You step back for a moment, wiping sweat from your forehead and taking stock of the workshop. The pile of finished items has grown slightly, though the looming stack of projects still dwarfs your modest achievements. Hinges, nails, hooks, a half-completed ladle, all awaiting final shaping or quenching. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths worked primarily from routine or improvisation, but in your current haze, improvisation seems like a luxury you cannot afford. Every strike of the hammer must count, every adjustment precise. There is no room for error, no margin for just close enough. A sudden voice interrupts the cadence of your labor. It's the apprentice, holding a small bundle of tongs and looking nervously toward the forge. "Master, the hinges, one of them has warped in the fire," he says. You suppress a groan, already imagining the delicate bending and reshaping required. Warped metal is both a minor catastrophe and an opportunity. Minor because it must be fixed, and an opportunity because there is a faint, almost meditative satisfaction in coaxing stubborn iron back into submission. You take the warped hinge, examining it closely. Its edges are twisted in ways that suggest the metal resented the heat, or perhaps it resented your hammering. Either way, it needs correction. You place it carefully on the anvil, reposition the tongs, and begin the meticulous work of reshaping. Each strike is calculated, deliberate, almost surgical. The metal resists initially, but gradually bends to your will, the edges aligning slowly, stubbornly, until the hinge begins to resemble the one you intended. Outside, the village hums with life. You hear carts creaking over cobblestones, the distant bleat of a goat, and a faint argument about whose turn it is to fetch water from the well. The noises are distant yet intrusive, reminders that the world beyond your forge continues, indifferent to the sweat and toil of your craft. You pause briefly to acknowledge the distraction, then return to the hinge, resuming the rhythm of hammer and metal. Your arms ache, but the repetition begins to induce a strange trance. Each clang of the hammer reinforces the movement. The heat of the forge wraps around you like a second skin, and the world outside recedes further. You find yourself considering a small scholarly debate. Were medieval smiths trained more by observation or by sheer repetition? Looking at the apprentice fumbling with tongs nearby, you lean toward repetition. Experience shapes muscle memory in ways that theory never could. Sparks leap unpredictably from the anvil. One lands near your ear, another sizzles into the sand, and a third flares against the forge itself. You wave them away, muttering quietly to yourself. Another quirky tidbit enters your thoughts. Some smiths believe that sparks were tiny manifestations of the forge's spirit, testing the smith's focus. While you're not entirely convinced, it does give a poetic frame to the constant minor annoyances of the craft. You finish the hinge, setting it aside with a small, private sense of triumph. It is functional, straight, and sturdy, a victory, if a quiet one. The forge hisses approvingly, or perhaps it's just angry that the work is momentarily paused. You shake out your arms, feeling the exhaustion and the quiet satisfaction mingling together. And then, inevitably, you turn back to the remaining pile of projects. The forge waits, the hammer waits, and you wait with them. Each strike, each adjustment, each sigh and pause becomes part of the rhythm, a pattern repeated countless times throughout history by those who shared your trade. You feel connected to the past, to the lineage of hands shaping iron, enduring heat, negotiating with stubborn metal, and occasionally cursing quietly at sparks. By late afternoon, the forge has claimed most of your energy, but there is a steady, satisfying progress. Pieces take shape, sparks continue to leap, and the apprentice begins to gain confidence, even managing to straighten a small hook without spilling it into the sand. The rhythm of the day, chaotic yet strangely comforting, continues to wash over you. And you realize, amid the sweat, the heat, and the relentless hammering, that this is your life. Not glamorous, not celebrated, often exhausting, but undeniably meaningful in its own quiet, fiery way. The forge hisses, the iron responds, and you, hammer in hand, remain at the center of it all, shaping both metal and history, one blow at a time. As the afternoon light begins to soften, spilling through the workshop windows in lazy amber streaks, you feel the weight of the day pressing down harder. Not just the physical weight of hammering, bending, and shaping iron, but the invisible weight of expectation. Each piece of metal represents a promise, to a customer, to yourself, to the villagers who rely on your craft. And yet, in the quiet moments between the strikes of your hammer, there is a strange rhythm, almost hypnotic, that allows you to keep moving forward despite the exhausting. You pick up a new bar of iron, freshly pulled from the coals. It glows a deep orange, as if smoldering with its own anticipation. You grasp it firmly with your tongs, feeling the heat bite through the gloves. Even after years, the forge never gets comfortable, never gentle. You lay the bar across the anvil, adjusting your stance, bracing against the resistance that iron always seems to offer. Then, with a deliberate swing, you strike. The clang reverberates through the workshop,
echoing off the walls, mixing with the soft hiss of the fire and the occasional drip of molten metal from earlier work. Some medieval blacksmiths believed that if you spoke kindly to the metal, it would bend more willingly. You hum a low tune, whispering encouragements under your breath. The metal does not respond verbally, but the sparks seem to dance in time with your voice. Perhaps superstition, perhaps coincidence, but today it feels like a secret ally in the struggle against the stubbornness of iron. The apprentice watches you intently, his eyes wide as he absorbs the rhythm of your movements. He tries to imitate your swings, but his hammer strikes too lightly or too harshly or in just the wrong angle. You resist the urge to sigh and instead offer small, patient corrections. "Not so much here," you murmur, guiding his hand. "Let the metal tell you what it needs." It is sage advice, though the apprentice seems convinced the metal is actively conspiring against him. You chuckle quietly, thinking that perhaps, in a metaphorical sense, it is. Outside, the village continues its slow, noisy life. A cart rattles down the street, and you hear someone shouting about eggs being sold fresh from the henhouse. A dog barks. A child laughs. The sounds seep through the open door, an indifferent reminder that the world doesn't pause for the forge, or for your aching arms, or your relentless hammering, or the sparks that insist on landing exactly where they shouldn't. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were truly insulated from the chaos outside, or whether the forge was simply a bubble where their focus could survive despite it all. Today, you feel the truth of both. The bar begins to take shape under your repeated strikes. Each hammer blow gradually coaxes it into a form that will serve a purpose beyond its original, raw state. There is something satisfying in this process, something almost meditative. The repetition allows your mind to wander, drifting through memories, small jokes, and minor complaints about medieval life. One such thought surfaces: the absurdity of villagers who insisted that everything you made be both indestructible and perfectly lightweight. You snort softly, picturing a plowshare that doubles as a feather. A spark lands near your foot and you tap it away, remembering yet again that fire is both companion and adversary. One misstep, one careless movement, and it could mean burns or worse. And yet, the risk is part of the rhythm. The danger is part of the dance. You swing the hammer again, feeling the vibration travel through your arms, your shoulders, your chest. It is exhausting, it is painful, and it is strangely satisfying. The apprentice approaches with a small, bent piece of metal. "Master, this hook, I think I ruined it," he says, eyes wide with fear. You take it from him and examine it carefully. The bend is awkward but recoverable. With a few calculated taps, the metal straightens and you hand it back with a small nod. He beams as though a tiny miracle has occurred. You allow yourself a small, private smile. Teaching is exhausting, but moments like this remind you that the craft extends beyond the metal. It extends to the hands and minds of those who follow in your footsteps. The floor is a patchwork of metal scraps, coals, and sand. The air smells of iron, sweat, and smoke, a pungent perfume that marks every blacksmith's domain. The windows are streaked with dust and soot, catching the fading light in a way that seems almost intentional. You breathe deeply, tasting the warmth and dryness of the workshop, the faint metallic tang that clings to your skin and hair. Were medieval blacksmiths more concerned with utility or aesthetics? The debate continues today, with some arguing that beauty was secondary to function, while others point to intricately forged door hinges, decorative nails, and ceremonial weapons. Looking around at your own work, you realize the answer is both. Function dominates, but beauty emerges from necessity and repetition. It is a subtle form of artistry, often unrecognized, quietly appreciated only by those who notice. Your attention returns to the bar of iron on the anvil. The shape is nearly complete,
but the final refinement requires precision. You adjust your stance, lift the hammer, and strike again. Sparks leap in chaotic arcs, some landing in the sand, some in the forge, and a few daring to brush against your gloves. You work carefully, each strike deliberate, each adjustment a negotiation with the metal itself. Time seems to stretch. The rhythm of hammering, the hiss of the forge, the occasional interruption from the apprentice all blend into a seamless experience. Pain and exhaustion linger, but they are part of the rhythm, part of the process, part of being a blacksmith. Each piece shaped, each spark flying, each bead of sweat sliding down your face reminds you that the work is demanding, relentless, and entirely absorbing. By the time the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the workshop, the bar is complete. Functional, straight, sturdy, and oddly satisfying. You step back, wiping your hands on your apron, breathing deeply, feeling both the fatigue and the quiet pride that comes from a day spent shaping raw material into something that will last. The forge hisses in quiet approval, or perhaps it's merely acknowledging that today, at least, you survived its demands. For a brief moment, you simply stand, listening to the sounds of the village outside and the gentle crackle of the fire, letting your body recover and your mind drift. You are aware of the rhythm, the repetition, the heat, and the hammer, and you understand that this is not merely work. It is survival, artistry, and the lineage stretching back generations. The apprentice watches quietly, having absorbed at least a fraction of the lessons today. The forge waits patiently for tomorrow, and you allow yourself the smallest sense of accomplishment before preparing for the next round of labor. Evening begins to settle in, and the forge glows dimmer, softer now, though the heat still lingers stubbornly, wrapping around your shoulders like an uninvited cloak. You pause for a moment, wiping sweat from your brow with the back of your sleeve, listening to the gentle hiss of the coals as they cool, and the faint creak of your tools settling into place. It's a rare, fleeting moment of calm, though you know better than to assume it will last. The pile of work remains. The apprentice fidgets nervously in the corner, and tomorrow will bring yet another onslaught of orders and inquiries from villagers who are blissfully unaware of the labor required to produce even a single iron nail. You pick up a nearly finished gate hinge, its edges smooth, the curves precise. It humps faintly under your fingers, the way iron sometimes seems to vibrate with memory, as if aware of the blows it endured and the transformation it underwent. You place it carefully on the anvil, ready for one final refinement. Every strike is now measured, deliberate, slow, because you know that rushing is when mistakes happen. You tap gently, feeling the metal shift minutely beneath the hammer, and adjust again. A spark leaps, unpredictable, yet somehow comforting. Sparks are like little reminders that the forge is alive, that the work you do is part negotiation, part ritual, and entirely mesmerizing. Your mind drifts to the apprentice, who stands nearby holding a small hook he's clearly overanalyzed. "Master, he begins, then catches himself, uncertain whether to ask a question or simply watch. You nod at him gently, indicating he should observe. Sometimes the best lesson isn't in instruction, but in watching the repetition and the rhythm of skill over time. Scholars still debate whether medieval apprentices actually learned through formal teaching or simply absorbed knowledge through observation. But here, today, you lean toward observation. He will remember the movements, the timing, the subtle adjustments far longer than any words you could offer. Outside, the village has slowed. The market is gone, the clamor of children muted, and even the livestock seems to rest. A dog barks distantly. A lone cart rattles over uneven stones. The world continues at its own pace, indifferent to your forge, indifferent to the sweat, burns, and blisters that define your day. And yet, within these walls, there is a rhythm that exists only here. Hammer strikes, sparks flying, coals hissing, metal bending,
and the steady breathing of a blacksmith entrenched in centuries of tradition.
You glance at the wall where the tools hang: tongs, hammers, chisels, files, all bearing the marks of decades of use. Each has its own history. Each has a story of triumphs and mistakes. You pick up a hammer with a worn wooden handle, and for a brief moment, imagine all the hands that have held it before yours. A quirky thought crosses your mind. Perhaps the metal and tools remember their past as vividly as you remember the morning's market chaos. A blade once forged by a smith long dead might still hum faintly when struck just right. It's unlikely, of course, but the idea comforts you in a strange, superstitious way. You return your attention to the gate hinge. One final tap here, a subtle adjustment there. Your arms ache, your shoulders protest, and yet your mind finds a quiet rhythm, a meditative cadence that carries you through the fatigue. Every movement is deliberate, every strike counts. The metal bends, surrenders, and finally aligns perfectly. You set it aside with a faint sense of satisfaction, a quiet victory earned through persistence, patience, and a fair share of cursing under your breath. A knock at the door interrupts your focus. A villager peeks in, asking if you could mend a small iron lock before the sun fully sets. You nod, gesturing him to wait. The forge still demands your attention, but the day isn't over until the last request is addressed. You pick up the lock, inspecting it under the dimming light. Its mechanism is stubborn, a tiny puzzle that requires precision and patience. You adjust the pins, oil the hinges, and manipulate the small levers. Slowly, deliberately, it begins to function again. The villager nods, relief written across his face, and hands you a few coins. Small, but enough to affirm that your labor has value beyond the forge's heat and the aches of your body. You exhale slowly, letting the tension in your shoulders dissipate. The apprentice moves closer, curiosity overcoming his nervousness. "Master, how do you know when it's finished?" he asks quietly. You consider the question carefully. There's no strict rule, no bell that rings when perfection is achieved. It's a feeling, a combination of instinct, experience, and sometimes sheer luck. "You feel it," you reply softly. The metal tells you. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it yells. Listen carefully and you'll know. Historians still argue whether medieval blacksmiths relied more on tactile intuition or visual judgment, but you suspect it was a blend of both, honed over years of repetitive labor and careful observation. The apprentice nods slowly, committing the lesson to memory, or at least to some part of his mind that will register when it matters most. As the forge cools and the shadows lengthen, you take a brief moment to look around. The workshop is messy, tools scattered, coals glowing faintly, scraps of iron everywhere. But it is yours. Every mark, every dent, every burn is a testament to a day spent mastering heat, metal, and patience. You feel a quiet pride, not loud or boastful, but the soft, steady satisfaction of someone who knows the value of labor, rhythm, and persistence. A final thought drifts in, whimsical and peculiar. Some smiths believed that leaving a tiny mark on a piece of metal, a scratch, a dent, a subtle imperfection, was a way to ensure it had character, that it carried a piece of its maker into the future. You glance at the completed hinge, noticing a slight irregularity only you could see. Perhaps it carries your story now, a faint whisper of hours spent shaping, sweating, and negotiating with stubborn iron. You wipe your hands, blackened and roughened, and step back from the anvil. The day is done. Not glamorous, not effortless, not free from chaos, heat, or sparks, but finished. The forge hisses softly in farewell. The apprentice begins to gather his courage to tidy the workshop, and outside, the village settles into the calm of approaching night. You allow yourself a moment of reflection, feeling the quiet pride of survival, mastery, and resilience. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin anew. But tonight, in the amber glow of the fading forge, you simply breathe, listening to the lingering warmth, the hum of metal, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from having done your best. The workshop grows quieter as the final glow of the forge softens into a gentle, persistent warmth. Outside, the village has finally settled into evening stillness. You pause for a moment, letting the rhythm of the day dissolve from your arms and shoulders. The hammer rests at your side, its weight a comforting constant rather than a demand, and you take a slow, deliberate breath, letting the rich smell of iron, coal, and sweat fill your lungs. There's a calm in this exhaustion, a quiet satisfaction that follows long hours of relentless labor. You glance around at the completed work. Hinges, hooks, nails, the occasional ladle, each piece bearing the faint fingerprints of hours spent coaxing iron into obedience. It is a gallery of quiet triumphs, a testament to your skill, endurance, and patience. The apprentice has begun to tidy the workspace, stacking the tools with surprising precision, humming softly as he works. You watch him for a few moments, noting the subtle confidence in his movements. He is learning, not just the mechanics of the craft, but the rhythm, the patience, and the nuanced dialogue between hand, hammer, and metal. Scholars still debate how much of medieval blacksmithing knowledge was formal versus absorbed, but you recognize that some lessons can only be internalized by feeling the heat of the forge on your skin, the vibration of the hammer through your bones, and the occasional sting of a stray spark. He is beginning to understand that in his own tentative way. You step outside briefly, letting the evening air wash over you. The coolness is a balm against the lingering heat that clings stubbornly to your skin. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, a cart rattles over cobblestones, and the faint wind rustles through nearby trees. The world continues beyond the forge, indifferent yet strangely comforting. You breathe in the rhythm of it, imagining the generations of blacksmiths who came before you, shaping metal, shaping life, shaping history, one strike at a time. Returning inside, you sit on the edge of the workbench, letting your arms rest. The forge hisses softly, a whispering companion as you reflect on the day. You consider the balance of endurance and artistry, labor and rhythm, heat and hammer. Each piece of iron tells a story, the resistance, the shaping, the final surrender to skill and will. And in these stories, there is a quiet magic, an unspoken connection between maker and material that has endured through centuries. A quirky historical fact floats into your thoughts. In some regions, blacksmiths were believed to have almost mystical power, capable of influencing fates or warding off evil simply through their work. Perhaps it is superstition, but it speaks to the respect quietly earned by those who dedicate themselves to craft, patience, and precision. You glance at the final pieces of work, noting the slight imperfections that make each unique. One hinge has a tiny nick only visible in the fading light. A hook leans ever so slightly to one side. Perfection is rare in this line of labor, but you have come to appreciate the small quirks as part of the personality of your work. Each mark, each subtle irregularity is a testament to your hands, your endurance, and your patience. The forge's warmth lingers, and you imagine it wrapping around each piece of metal like a gentle cloak, holding the memory of today within its iron heart. As the apprentice finishes stacking the remaining tools, you rise slowly, stretching muscles that have spent the day in unyielding motion. The sun has dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of pink and purple that filter through the windows and settle on the dusty surfaces. The forge cools gradually, its hiss softening to a quiet whisper. You feel the weight of accomplishment pressing gently against your shoulders, a satisfaction born not from applause or accolades, but from the knowledge that the day's labor has been done well, fully, and with care. Now comes the wind down, the final easing into night. You sit quietly on a stool near the forge, letting your body sink into the stillness. Your breathing slows, your heart follows, and your thoughts drift like sparks fading into darkness. The smell of iron and coal lingers softly, comforting in its familiarity. Outside, the village is quiet, and inside, the workshop is still. You let your eyelids feel heavy, your muscles soften, and the repetitive rhythm of hammer, heat, and fire fade gently into memory. It is a moment of reassurance. You have survived another day in the forge. You have shaped not just metal, but resilience, patience, and subtle artistry. Tomorrow will demand the same attention, the same rhythm, the same endurance. But tonight, the forge rests, the apprentice rests, and you rest. Feel the calm. Let the warmth fade slowly, the light dim gradually, and the quiet of evening envelop you like a gentle, protective blanket. Let your mind drift along with the embers. Let the small victories of the day linger like soft music, and allow every lingering ache to dissolve slowly into comfort. The world beyond the forge continues, but here, in this workshop of heat, iron, and tireless rhythm, peace settles like dust upon the shelves. The day is done, the work is complete, and now you may simply rest. Breathe slowly, letting your body sink into the chair, the floor, or even the edge of the workbench, wherever you find the most comfort. Feel the warmth of the forge lingering gently against your skin, fading gradually as the night draws on. Your muscles, tight and sore from hours of repetition, now relax in quiet relief. The rhythm of hammer and metal is a distant memory, replaced by the soft, steady pulse of your own breath. Allow your mind to drift along the fading embers, each one a tiny reminder of effort, skill, and endurance now at peace. Outside, the village rests. The faint sounds of life, an occasional dog, a distant cart, fade into background calm. Inside, the workshop is still, the tools settled in place, the metal cool, but carrying the quiet memory of transformation. Let this stillness wrap around you like a soft blanket. You are safe, you are whole. The day's work, its challenges, and its small triumphs are all behind you. You have done your part, shaped your pieces, guided the apprentice, and survived the forge's unrelenting rhythm. Now, close your eyes gently. Imagine the warmth of the forge fading into cool comfort. Picture the sparks drifting upwards, slowly extinguishing into calm night air. Every ache, every twinge, every hint of fatigue dissolves into the softness of rest. Let the quiet, steady rhythm of your breathing replace the clang of metal. Feel the satisfaction of a day fully lived, a craft fully practiced, and the life quietly endured. Drift into sleep with the knowledge that tomorrow you may rise again, stronger, ready, and ready to shape more than just iron, ready to shape the day itself. End of script. Sweet dreams.